History is changing. New archaeological evidence is showing us that the pharaohs of ancient Egypt used tobacco and cocaine. They also used hashish and opium. It's no surprise that hashish and opium are mentioned in medicinal texts from ancient Egypt, as these were easily available from Syria, from Turkey, from Afghanistan, and from India. What is surprising is that the ancient pharaohs were using tobacco and cocaine, which are plants which only were available from South America. This means that thousands and thousands of years ago, the ancient royal elite of Egypt were able to travel right across the world and buy psychoactive drugs. Cocaine is being used to this day as a stimulant to allay fatigue by tribal people such as the Kogi Indians in Colombia. There is no doubt whatsoever that tobacco and cocaine was available and was being used by the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. We have found shards of tobacco in the mummy of Ramesses II, perhaps the most famous pharaoh of all time. We've also found tobacco and cocaine in mummies that were held by the Bavarian Royal State Egyptological Museum. Some of these mummies had had a very long life. They were 3,000 years old, some of them had been decapitated, and many other mummies were ground up to make mummy powder tea in the Victorian era. In the mid-1980s, these mummies were unwrapped, and inside the chest cavities of some of these mummies were found individually mummified organs, livers, stomachs, and lungs. These organs, which were 3,000 years old, were cross-sectioned, they were placed into blocks of Vaseline, and they were placed under electron microscopes. The evidence which we now have is that we know from the tissue of inside these lungs from these ancient Egyptian mummies that tobacco and cocaine were inhaled and hashish was being eaten by the royal pharaohs of ancient Egypt. So the first question we should ask ourselves is, how on earth did pharaohs in ancient Egypt manage to get hold of plants which grew in South America? To answer this question, we should first of all take a look at some very, very ancient maps. Maps that were published long before Christopher Columbus was meant to have discovered America. Amazingly, the 5th century Macrobius map features the northern sector of South America, and it labels this part of the land Perusta. Then there is the Albertine de Verga map, which dates from 1414. This also seems to indicate a segment of South America which is named Peru. That's modern day Peru. Then there is the Andrea Bianco map, published in 1436, and that also seems to label a piece of land that looks as if it's part of South America and has a name which is very similar to the modern day name for Peru. All in all, as we look at these ancient maps and ancient globes, it seems that long, long before Christopher Columbus, there were people drawing maps who were fully aware that South America existed. And South America is where we find cocaine, it's where we find the tobacco plant, and it's also where we find other very powerful psychedelic hallucinogenic drugs. Tobacco and cocaine have been found not once, not twice, but 3 times by 3 separate teams of scientists in 2 different countries inside Egyptian mummified bodies. The evidence is incontrovertible. Therefore, we must now rewrite ancient history as far as the pharaohs of ancient Egypt are concerned. There are basically just 2 routes which the tobacco and cocaine could have taken in the ancient world. They could have been shipped across the Atlantic from the coast of South America, coming into the Mediterranean, and then eventually Egypt. The other route, a much longer route, would have seen tobacco and cocaine being shipped across the Pacific, possibly using stop-off points such as Easter Island, and then going across to India, and then making its way into the Red Sea and Egypt from the Pacific route. Whichever way you look at it, tobacco and cocaine were being imported and were being used by the pharaohs, and this must have been a very, very expensive exercise. It proves, without question, that there was global trade going on in psychedelic and psychoactive substances. One of the major civilizations involved in this kind of early ancient form of drug peddling were the Magi from Iran. If indeed there was trade between Egypt and South America, then we should first of all ask ourselves if there are traces of European or African civilizations to be found in South America. The answer to that question can be found in the Veracruz San Lorenzo district of Mexico. There we find giant stone carved heads. The civilization that carved these heads have been labelled the Olmecs. Their facial features seem to suggest that these people with their broad noses and thick lips came from the continent of Africa, thousands of miles away from South America. The Olmecs are indeed one of the greatest mysteries of archaeology. But it's not necessarily just Africa that has people with broad noses and thick lips. It could equally be possible that the Olmecs were from Polynesia in the South Pacific. They may have actually been distant ancestors of the Maori people, which we see in today's New Zealand. Another possibility, which is not really considered in many of the archaeological texts, is that the Olmec people could have come from Asia, particularly the Philippines or Malaysia, where again we see people with broad noses and thick lips. Whatever the case, wherever the Olmec civilization came from, it's clear that they were not indigenous people, as their facial features differ strikingly from the indigenous Mexicans and Guatemalans.
Hawati en tau, tem jefa kau, ta pen em awef, mu ef, ta ef, sem ef, menemenet ef nebet, hayet nebet, enenet nebet, jedefuet ef.
Stone Age Psychedelia is a 500-page book weighing nearly a kilo, which exposes the secrets of the ancients. It's delivered with a DVD documentary filmed on location in Egypt and has more than 100 illustrations, diagrams, and old maps which reveal information about the pyramids, the pharaohs, hallucinogenic plants, ancient electrical batteries, and the magical rituals to summon the gods. Stone Age Psychedelia decodes the hieroglyphs of Egypt and the cuneiform tablets of Sumeria. It is a book which explores the hallucinogenic plants which inspired Judaism, Kabbalah, Satanism, Christianity, and Islam. Stone Age Psychedelia investigates the psychedelic secrets of the royal elite in the ancient world. These magicians, these prophets, these monks and pharaohs were truly masters of the universe.